Hello and welcome to the show. I am not your usual host. You may not recognize my voice. My name is Grace Marshall. I am head coach and chief encourager at gracemarshall.com and a productivity ninja with Think Productive. And it's my absolute pleasure to put Alison Jones on the other side of her own podcast today. So welcome to the show, Alison.
This is doing my head in. This is so weird. Thank you, Grace. Thank you for having me.
I'm going through this thinking, am I doing it right? I'm like, but I'm on the other side of the chair now, so I have control.
You're the host.
Brilliant. Okay, so Alison, I am looking through your About the Author page on your new book, Exploratory Writing, which we are going to be talking about today. And I've just been looking at how you've been in publishing all your life, really,
yes,
haven't
which
you?
is a very long time because I'm very old. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not going to say the years. People can look it up themselves. But from your days as an editor with Chambers Harrop and Oxford University Press to being the Director of Innovation Strategy at Macmillan before setting up Practical Inspiration Publishing in 2014. And of course, I know you as a champion of business books. So you were a champion for my third book, Struggle, and as well as a whole host of business writers, authors, thought leaders. But we're here to talk about your book, your new book. So let's start there. So, I mean, tell me about your new book.
It's so funny, isn't it? And I really struggle with this in a way because I think I am a publisher first and an author second. And publicizing my own book is all kinds of weird. It's very, very strange. But yet, weirdly, exploratory writing, I guess it had its genesis in three things. This podcast and just hearing again and again from people that what they value most about writing is what it does for them as people, as humans, as thinkers, was really interesting. I was like, there's something interesting there. And the second one is working with authors who tell me exactly the same thing. And when you're working with a business book author, they're not an author first, they're a business book person first. And the writing doesn't necessarily come easily. And when they start off, they think it's going to be amazing having a book to sell in my business as a business card. That's kind of what people say. But actually, when they come back to me afterwards at the end of the process, it's like, my goodness, writing this book has changed the way I think about what I do. And it's given me a framework, and it's given me, insights and ideas and made connections. So all of that, the process of writing and what it did for them. And then I guess thirdly was the really, really personal experience, which I talk about in the book, which is not my finest hour, but, sort of waking up in an absolute panic at 3 a.m. as a fairly new entrepreneur, convinced that what have I done? We're going to lose the house, all that kind of panic that I now know is absolutely par for the course. But at the time, at 3 a.m, you don't have any perspective. It feels real. And just doing what occurred to me, which was reaching for a pen and a piece of paper and just starting to write about how I was feeling, what I was experiencing in my body, and realizing that writing about it gave me a different take on it. It changed my state, and it brought me from this, kind of headless chicken, sort of useless running around mentality to feeling much more calm and resourced and creative. And by the end of just a few minutes of writing, I was coming up with ideas as to, how to get some revenue in to stabilize the revenue, the cash flow situation. So that was a real personal experience of what I had kind of already intuited, that writing is this incredibly powerful process. And we think of it as a way of communicating with people, showing off, performing. And actually, when we allow ourselves the time and space to do it just for ourselves and not with any sense of polish or perfection, it really helps us think. It gets all the kind of stuff from inside your brain out into the safe place where you can look at it and sort it out and do something with it.
Yeah. And it's funny because when I was reading through the book, one thing I noticed was it's a tool that works for a whole span of people. So you've got seasoned writers talking about how this helps them in the process of deciding what they think, as well as what they want to communicate out into the world. And then, like you say, you've got business people who maybe writing isn't their first strength. It's the tool they want to use to get their ideas out into the world, but their strengths are more in their speaking or their thinking. So write the whole range of authors and business authors. Tell me a little bit about that sort of brain process, because I found that fascinating.
Yeah, so the process of the cognitive, what's going on in your brain when you're writing, yeah, it is. It's absolutely fascinating. And, this is the great joy of writing a book, is you get to do all the research to find out what's going on in there. And, one of the most incredible things that I discovered, which made all kinds of sense once I had a word for it, is the sort of mental reflex that is instinctive elaboration, which is that if you give your brain a question, it can't help but go looking for answers. It just can't, that's how we're designed. And when you know that, you suddenly think, well, actually, all my job is to come up with the good questions, isn't it? And then those three things, the question that you set yourself, and the time and the space, the page that you kind of set aside for that. And I say in the book, 6 minutes, I think is optimum, because it allows you to just blast stuff down. And then by the end of it, you're kind of, your hand gives up. But, that speed allows you to kind of break through the self-editing and the self-criticism and the double thinking and all that. Just get it down, and then you can look at it. But the questions that you ask yourself when you're not thinking about it very hard tend to be really unhelpful. They tend to be, oh, why did I say that? And, why am I so useless? And of course, you get busy finding some really unhelpful answers to those sorts of questions. But when you get really curious and you lean in and you get solution focused with your questions, what's one thing I could do to be more organized, or whatever that is. And then you literally set your brain that prompt and give yourself a few minutes to write into it. That's when you really start to come up with the gold. So those kind of neurological tics, if you're going to have mental reflexes, I say in the book, you might as well make the most of them.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. And it's a funny one, isn't it? Because I think there's a difference between saying it and writing it. And I know when I've tried it in your workshops, that it's a funny thing, because somebody said to me the other day, we don't really want to be moaning about something forever, do we? We want to move on. But the thing about writing and moaning, having a writing rant, is your hand gets tired. It's amazing how quickly I find myself getting bored of my own rant, whereas maybe I wouldn't have done if I was talking about
thinking
it.
about
Is
it.
that just me,
No,
or
I
have
think
you
that's
found that to be
absolutely
true?
When we're thinking, we can ruminate on something literally forever. It just, there are people who spend their whole lives reliving that moment and, wishing it had been otherwise, and, and it's desperate. But I think when you are thinking, you can only have kind of one thought, one instance of a thought in your mind at one time, and then it loops around kind of endlessly. As you say, when you're writing, once you've written it, there it is on the page, and it's pretty unrewarding to write that 15 times in a way that you might think it 15 times without batting an eyelid. And so you start to move into a slightly different space, which is I have seen myself. I now feel seen, I feel heard, and I can move on, and I can think, and you start almost inevitably. And it's really interesting when you watch people in workshops doing this. They start with a kind of itchy, scratchy, sort of unsettled kind of energy around them, and they're writing about this thing which is problematic. And then about 2 minutes in, give or take a few seconds, you see them physically shift, and they breathe differently, and you know that they've moved on to a kind of, oh, that's interesting. What if I, or I could, or oh, perhaps. And it's a really interesting thing to watch. And you're right, it doesn't tend to happen in thinking at all. It can happen. It definitely can happen in a coaching conversation. In a sense, I think exploratory writing is a way of self-coaching, and it just makes that process more visible to you. If you have a good coach who's asking good questions, giving you the space and time to answer those questions and leading you on, that's great. But nobody has a coach on call 24/7. Well, maybe some people do. I don't.
Yeah, when it's 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, no coach is going to want to hear from me at that point.
So this is kind of like having, a really cheap coach, actually, in your pocket.
And it's even better than that, because it's you, and as any coach will tell you, the solutions that you come up with, they're the ones you're bought into. They're the ones that are going to work for you in your unique circumstances, with your unique predilections and preferences and quirks, So it's super powerful.
Yes.
Yeah. And you say, it's professional writers discover it, business people discover it. I'm kind of on a mission to help everybody discover it, because I think that people who say they can't write, what they really mean is they aren't confident about where to put the apostrophe, or, they don't feel they make a good impression when they write. And it doesn't matter. That's my point, is that this is a really democratic thing where you can write spelling any way you like, putting the apostrophe any damn place you please. And even stopping writing and starting drawing, or making sort of arrows and loops, or whatever it is that makes sense to you. It's not for anybody else, and therefore you don't have to worry about how somebody's going to receive it. It's purely this kind of private space where it can be whatever you need it to be in that moment.
Love it. So I'm curious, you said that you stumbled on this, sounds like it was right at the beginning of your business journey.
Yeah.
So give me a potted history of what happened between then and now.
With the business or with the writing?
Yeah.
Oh gosh. Well, it's funny, when I started Practical Inspiration Publishing, it wasn't really ever intended to be publishing. And I know, bear with me. I left traditional corporate publishing in 2014. I retrained as a coach, and it was my firm conviction that publishing was broken. And although I loved it, it was on the wrong side of history, because information wanted to be free and all that. And, it was always hard to make a living as a publisher. It was getting impossibly hard. And that sort of sense of closing down access to content, which traditional publishers require because that's how they make their money, just didn't seem to be the way that history was heading. So I retrained as a coach. I started up as a business coach. And when you do that, you have to take on a lot of practice clients. And almost to a person, every single one of those practice clients, as soon as they found out that I was a publisher, all they wanted to talk about was publishing their book. And so it took a while. I mean, that sounds like it was a kind of aha moment. It did take a while. And for a little while, I was kind of helping people write their book, because obviously, I've got a background in editorial and organizing ideas, and that's fairly straightforward for me. And then I was helping them produce their book. So, copy editing, typesetting, proofreading, all that kind of stuff. And then, in a sense, handing them their book and saying, right, you are a business person, you can now go and sell this. And of course they couldn't, because books are different. So over that first 4 or so years in the business, I really was kind of coming to the kind of reluctant recognition that actually, if I was going to do this properly, I had to be a proper publisher. And that's kind of where we are now. Practical Inspiration has all the stuff I would have sworn was completely irrelevant and anachronistic, 10 years ago, like rep teams and warehouses and rights managers and all that paraphernalia. Because actually, books really still matter, and they've held their place in our content ecosystem and in our cultural value structures incredibly well, because they do what they do so brilliantly. And I think that's why writing matters, actually.
Yeah, and it's funny. The roundabout way in which you discover it reminds me of that quote of like, wherever you go, there you are.
But actually, it was a really useful route, because what it did was bring. So I had the publishing experience, I had the MBA and the board level experience, the kind of the business stuff, and training as a coach brought in, I think, that third dimension, and in that Venn diagram is my zone of genius, and it's where I work now. And I think it was a really great unplanned route.
Love it. So when did you decide that this might become a book, Exploratory Writing?
That's a great question, because I published This Book Means Business, which was a really tactical, practical book about writing a book to build your business back in 2018. And I thought, well, I think that's probably my book for this business. I've said it all, there we are. And then job done. And I wish I could remember the first kind of dawning of the recognition that there was a book around exploratory writing. It was, as I say, the combination of those things. And then I produced a course called Right Brained, which was really about helping people discover this incredibly simple, lightweight, but powerful tool that, as soon as you introduce it to people, it was day one of the Business Book Proposal Challenge. It still is day one of the 10-day Business Book Proposal Challenge. And the number of people who said, oh my goodness, this is transformational. If I take nothing else away from this course, this thing is genius. And so I sort of knew that it worked. And I also knew that bizarrely, most people didn't seem to know about it. And so I I thought that's worth developing. And so I developed a course called Right Brained, which was a sort of a 28-day introduction to exploratory writing. And it was at that point, I think I went, ooh, there's a book here. And it was called Right Brained for the longest time, WRIT, Right Brain. And I never quite felt comfortable with it, because I think that whole kind of left-right brain thing is a little bit discredited, a little bit passé. And I thought, what I need to do is do what I always tell my authors to do, which is find the phrase that you can own, that describes what it is you're doing, and that other people can pick up and run with as well. And I created a sort of 4x4 matrix along the axis of how clear you are about what you're writing about, and how internal the process is, whether you're sharing it with other people or keeping it to yourself. And down in that bottom left quadrant, where it's all about you and you haven't got a clue what it is you're talking about, is exploratory writing.
Love it. Yeah. And and there's, what I love about the book as well is there are so many different applications. There's a brilliant bit right at the beginning where you went, if all you do is take away this idea and just go off and write and don't read the rest of the book, that's fine. But carry on reading.
I say, yeah, do, because there's some good stuff coming up. Yeah. And I mean, the marketing manager found that very hard, because she was like, well, who's it for? I was like, well, it's kind of for everybody. And I hate that, because I always tell everybody, you can't write for everybody. But there we are.
We had that conversation.
Well, and it's very similar, because struggle is for everyone, and exploratory writing is for everyone. And what you have to do when you're marketing is find the use cases. So, for example, I've just written a piece for a sort of CEO magazine about how you can use exploratory writing in meetings to support inclusivity. Because if you allow everybody the space to just write their reactions and thoughts and ideas for a few minutes at the beginning, you avoid groupthink, you allow people to write in their own language if English isn't their first language, to write visually if that's the thing, to organise their ideas if they are reflectors and introverts or neuroatypical. And it also, you kind of just avoid that thing where you start speaking and immediately the most confident, usually most senior, often male, extrovert,
the hippo effect.
Yeah, most confident native language speaker in the room holds the floor and anchors the discussion to their ideas. So there's lots of different applications for it, and you've got to be quite smart with your talks and your workshops and your marketing as to how you actually show people how they can use it in that specific use case, but then remind them that this is for, frankly, anything.
Yeah, I love that. So it's that kind of soul searching, grappling stuff, but then it's also some really practical things, like
Super
you
practical.
say, at the beginning of a meeting. I can imagine there's a lot of uses for innovation. With that kind of. And I just want to ask you about, and this is purely selfish and personal for me, because the area I'm really interested in at the moment is this area of, I guess, psychological safety around uncertainty, around mistake making, around life's shittier moments, as I call them. But it just feels like, and I'd love to know if you found the same. It feels like we're going through this season at the moment where everybody is in uncharted territory. Everyone's in a place where we go, it wasn't like this before, and maybe we don't know what we're doing, or we feel like we're overstretched. That whole imposter syndrome thing. So it just feels like the perfect storm at the moment. So when I was reading what you wrote about just even the essence of exploration, the fact that we don't know, how do we get comfortable with that? So what do you see in terms of exploratory writing and its role that it can play in this season of life and work that we're in at the moment?
I think that's such a great question. And I guess there's lots of different ways of answering that. What I'm going to sort of land on, I think, is about having a judgment-free space. Because one of the things that I think a lot of people are aware of today as well is the risk of saying the wrong thing, of offending someone, of being pointed at as having, said the wrong thing on the fly. And so that makes it really hard to grapple publicly with stuff when you don't quite know what it is you think about it, because you're on the record quite quickly and it's very easy to get things wrong. So just having a safe space where you can not worry about how it's going to land with people, but just explore, what is it that I'm feeling here? Name the sensation, the emotion, the difficulty, the frustration, because once you have named it and brought it out and understood it and dug into it and going, and I think this is because, whatever that is, then you can do the kind of processing piece where you go, right, I think I understand that a little bit better now, and I'm ready to start communicating that in a way that is appropriate for other people to access. But it takes away, I think if you're trying to do the two things at the same time, the communicating piece and the processing piece, that's really hard. It's like trying to write and edit at the same time, really hard. And you end up constraining yourself and thinking smaller than you should and second guessing yourself all the time. So just having that sense of a lab bench or a play park. I use lots of different metaphors in the book about what that page can be for you, a rehearsal space, it's like when it's that Hemingway thing, isn't it? Write drunk, edit sober. Most of us don't have, we're writing straight on screen most of the time. We're writing it in an email or a memo or something that's designed for other people to consume. Having a scruffy piece of paper gives your brain the signal that this is off grid, it's offline, nobody's going to see this is just for me, and it's not perfect and it's messy, and that's okay, and that's really important.
Yeah. And it just strikes me as well that, in our world, especially in the work that I do around productivity, often we have this culture where speed is king. So it's like almost you identify the problem and you want to find the solution straight away. It's like, what am I going to do? What are we going to do? And sometimes the things that we can reach for straight away are maybe the familiar things rather than the innovation or the new thinking. So it's almost like you're creating extra space. There's an expansiveness to that of going, do you know what? We don't have to land straight away. We can go mid-air for a bit. We can hover for a bit. We can linger and then see what we notice and then decide where we're going to land, and maybe we'll land somewhere different. But of course, the beauty of this is that can happen in 6 minutes.
Right.
So even the most time-poor people can probably make 6 minutes, right?
And I think that is such a good, thank you for drawing attention to that. It's such a key point, is that you don't have to lock yourself away in a room for a writing day to come out with this stuff. There is real energy. It's a sprint, not a marathon. There's a real energy, and I literally set a timer for 6 minutes and just write. And we do this every week in the virtual campfire at the Extraordinary Business Book Club. It creates a couple of things. One is it gives you that sense that this is not going to be perfect. How could it be? I've only got 6 minutes. So that takes all the pressure off. And the other thing is it gives you speed, because you haven't got time to hang around and double think and check a reference. You just write. And that act of writing is what draws the ideas out. And I guess the third thing is that it gives you focus. And yes, it's only 6 minutes of focus, but if you think about how fragmented your day is and how many different directions you are being pulled in at any one time, usually, it's really hard for most of us to find the time for the deep work. But when the timer is going to go off in just a few minutes' time, you can completely focus on this task in hand, because it's not for very long, And that, I think we are losing the knack of focus, and it's a really great kind of micro focus to bring into your day. It's astonishing the power of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
The reason it's 6 minutes, by the way, you haven't asked me, so I'm going to tell you. Because I used to say 5 minutes, and then, only because it's a kind of round number and it's what you expect to hear, isn't it? And then I read Gilly Bolton. Gilly Bolton wrote the foreword for Exploratory Writing. She's amazing. She wrote Reflective Practice. And she has been doing this with professionals for years, and her optimum time was 6 minutes. And when I tried that, I realized why. It's because it takes 2 or 3 minutes to really get the good stuff. And if you're only writing for 5 minutes, that means you've only got 2 or 3 minutes of good stuff. If you write for 6 minutes, you've got this whole extra minute of the really good stuff for, very little kind of extra overhead. So it's very smart. But then more than 6 minutes, and it just becomes difficult to sustain that kind of energy in your writing.
Yes, and and I find, because I've joined you on some of those those campfire writing sprints, and it's funny how often you get to 5 minutes, and that last minute is where you get to the gold.
Right.
So all of a sudden, there's something interesting here now.
Yeah, and you can feel it, can't you? It's a real visceral sort of shift. It's really interesting to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me a little bit about the writing process for you. So was it different writing the second book compared to the first book? What were the highlights? What were the shitty moments? I want to know it all.
Yeah, there were a lot of them. It was really different. The first book, as I say, felt more practical, more tactical, more above the waterline. This is, how you can do it. Here's some tips from my background as a publisher and from the guests on the podcast. And it was a curated set of. I mean, it's really useful. Don't get me wrong. It's still it's still a really good book. I'm very proud of it, but it didn't feel. I didn't make myself very vulnerable. I certainly didn't tell the story about how I woke up at 3 a.m. in a panic. That was a big decision to include that first in my TEDx talk and then to bring it in here. There's much more of me, I think, in this, and I wrestled with it so much more than the other one. The other one is sort of short, bite-sized sort of tips on a whole range of, and the structure kind of wrote itself. This one, oh my goodness, I grappled with the structure. And it's so embarrassing because, I can do this for other people. I can say to them, boom, 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 there you go, there's your table of contents. Couldn't do it for myself. And in the end, I got so frustrated with myself and so stuck that I sent it. I sent the kind of, I can't even call it a beta draft. It wasn't even quite there yet. But I was like, look, this is what I've got. And I can't work out how to put it together. And I sent it to one of our development editors who work with Practical Inspiration. And she, bless her, was wonderful. She's like, lots of good stuff, terrible organisation. Here's what I suggest.
So good when you have someone who can just tell it to you how it is.
And you need that distance. It's impossible to sort of do this work for yourself. I certainly found it was. But funnily enough, she suggested a route. In fact, she suggested 2 routes, neither of which I took. But seeing those made me see what I could do. And I did it, and it worked really, really well. So I used those little metaphors, the little diagrams of the page and what it can be, as the kind of organising principle for the book. And why I hadn't thought of that before, I don't really know. But there we are. So yeah, no, I
Those
really
things are
grappled
always
with it.
obvious by hindsight, aren't they?
Do it's the funniest thing. Everybody says this. You write the book, and afterwards you can't imagine how it could have been any other way. And people go, "Oh, I love the way you've organised it," and you forget that during the process of the writing, you just had no idea how this was going to fit together, and it was a complete mess. And yeah, so it's a good reminder to anybody who's kind of in that mess that there will come the day when the book is out there and people go, "Oh, I love the way you structured it," and you will smile and you will not.
That reminds me a little bit about the of the sort of memory loss or change that you have after childbirth.
Yes, because otherwise none of us would ever do it again.
Exactly.
Yeah. Marathons, same. Yeah.
But is that similar, do you think, to sort of other authors' journeys, that like the first book is the obvious book, and then maybe the second, for me it was the third book that I started doing the real wrestling, the wrangling, and I don't actually know what this book is going to be, but I feel like I want to see where it goes. That's almost the exploratory writing of exploratory writing.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I've often thought that, Grace, because you obviously wrote, how to be really productive, which was this is what I do, here's the tactics, here's the productivity tips. And it's a great book. And it's not the personal kind of wrenching experience that you put into it, whereas struggle very much is. So yeah, I don't know if every author has it, but certainly out of the sample that we have here, 100% of us have experienced that.
It's good to know. We're in good company.
I think though, to do it as your second or third book in your case is good because you kind of know you can do it. So at least you have that kind of foundation of knowing I can do this. I have done this before. I can write a book. So you're not grappling with all the imposter syndrome and the overwhelm around that in the same way. So it frees you up perhaps to focus more on unearthing what on earth it is you want to say.
And I think it allows you to be a little bit braver as well.
Yeah.
And I remember because in fact, it might have been on the podcast interview when you interviewed me right at the beginning. I think you used to ask a question, didn't you, of like what would your advice be for a first-time author? And I think mine was just write the first book. Like tell yourself you're just writing the first book. You don't have to put everything in it. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be like what's the word? Opus magnum? Magnum opus?
Magnum opus.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be that. It just has to be the beginning, the first book. Yeah. So I think, once you have a book or two under your belt, maybe that's when we allow ourselves to be a bit braver and step out and go, I'm willing to delve into this, and I want to hone my craft. I want to see where this thing goes, rather than having the end in sight and doing that.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really profound insight, actually. I hadn't thought of it like that before, but you're dead right. Yeah.
Cool. Now, I didn't actually check with you how long we're allowed to talk for.
It's about now, really.
I know, excellent. Good timing.
I mean, we could go on all day, frankly, but
yeah,
we probably shouldn't.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk more at your book launch party. So
yay!
We may record something for the podcast then, or we might just put it all on TikTok.
Because we are queens of TikTok now.
We are indeed. Okay, let me land this then. I'd love to know what are your hopes for this book, and and the work you're doing on it. What do you hope this baby will achieve when it goes out into the world?
Yeah, it's a great question. And whenever I ask authors this, what I'm really asking is, how does this fit with your business? What's your strategy? And then they say something like, oh, I just really want it to help people. And I go, well, yes, that's very nice. But and there I am. Honestly, I'm doing my first talk at a school this week. And I'm so excited, because I think that if I can teach just a few of the kids who are in that audience not listening to me, if just a few of them pick up the idea that there is this thing called exploratory writing, and it takes all the pressure off them, and nobody's marking their work, and it just is for them, they can take that with them into the workplace, into their relationships. I mean, I honestly believe that is life-changing. So there is a real... I've always been passionate about the value of reading and writing for people, particularly at work, but not just at work. So I really want people to discover that, because I think it's such a benevolent technology. It's so simple. It's so easy to access. It's so inclusive. It's so easy. So let's see more of it, because I think people will have better mental health. They'll have better relationships. They'll be more productive. They'll be more creative, all of that good stuff. And I want to own that space. I want to be that person who talks about exploratory writing, who really continues to explore the use cases and work with people to understand what it looks like when you apply it in the organisation. I want to be doing workshops and talks and maybe even a PhD at one point. Yes, I said it. But all that stuff is just, I don't, this feels to me like something that has so much mileage in it, in work and in life. And I want to make the most of it. Personally and professionally.
Yeah, I've got
there you go.
Love it. It's funny, actually, you said about working in school, because I did. I went back to my old university last week. 20 years since I've been there, and I was being interviewed on my book by one of my old professors, who's now the dean of the School of Management, and we got talking about how that University of Bath, they attract a lot of sort of straight A students, top of the class. And there feels like there's huge pressure to always have to get it right, to always get the good grades. And so what does it look like to explore failure and mistake making and deviations and surprises in a healthy way? And in a time where that there is such a pressure of, I'm paying so much for this course, I better get it right. That actually this could be a really useful tool. And like you say, a really accessible tool.
And I think people look down on it because it's low tech, honestly. But I think that's its great thing, and it takes you offline. That in itself is just a joy in the middle of your workday, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely worth experimenting with. Oh, brilliant. Well, like you said, we could carry on just chatting forever, but I think let's wrap it up there.
But thank you so much, Grace. And it was so weird and so wonderful to be on the other side of the mic. Thank you so much for the interview.
Delighted.